We've talked a lot about Moses since we started, and Moses by this time is an old man, a very old man, and it's time for Moses to pass on to glory. And we're going to talk about his death either today and probably next week as well. One day, Dorothy and her friend Agnes were having coffee. Agnes noticed Dorothy was wearing a new necklace. "Well, is that a new locket?" And Dorothy replied, "Yes, it is." Agnes said, "What's that memento in the locket?" And Dorothy said, "Oh, it's a locket of Larry's hair." Agnes was concerned. She said, "Larry's still with us, isn't he?" And Dorothy replied, "Yes, but his hair isn't." So much for humor. There is a lady known as Sadie Nouse of Hollywood, Pennsylvania. I tried to find out if she's still alive, but she's actually passed away. She lived to be a super centenarian. Have you ever known anyone who is a super centenarian? This would be somebody who was born prior to the beginning of the century that we're currently in. She lived 2 centuries, in 2 different centuries. I think of the lady across the street. She looks a lot like Miss Dolores, and Dolores is 93 years old. She still drives. So I describe her car to you so you could watch out for that if you ever saw that. But she's such a wonderful lady. This lady died just seconds before 2000. If she had lived just a few seconds more, she would have lived into another century, into the third of the centuries that she lived in. A lot happened in her life. There were 7 major wars, 23 different presidents, and she witnessed a lot of innovation. She was born before TV. She was born before radio and TV and movies, the automobile, and of course the internet. Here's another supercentenarian, and one more very young at heart but very old person. His story is fairly typical. Ray Monroy was born in Arizona just 1912. Just 3 months after Arizona became a state. He lived and died in California. He married in 41, served in the Air Force in World War II. They were married for over 70 years, but his wife died in 2011 at the age of 94. And he turned 110 May of last year. He lived in St. Helena, Napa, California at the age of 110 years and 79 days. I know an older woman that told a friend, I feel my body has gotten totally out of shape. So I got my doctor's permission to join a fitness club and started exercising. I decided to take an aerobics class for seniors. So I went. I bent and twisted and gyrated. I jumped up and down and perspired for an hour. But by the time I got my leotards on, the class had already finished. I like that one. That's a good one. So what is your Jennerian age? Do you know your Jennerian age? This is how marketing might describe or classify you. I'm a baby boomer. I'm 66, and I was born right at the end of the Korean War in 1955. My dad was even in the Korean War. This makes me a sexagenarian, or as you might want to pronounce it, a sexy-genarian. Please carefully notice that the appropriate anniversary for my birthday would be a diamond, and it's coming up in a few months. Just a small one will do, okay? Moses would have been a super centenarian. He would have been one who lived in multiple centuries. The marketing generation refers to me as a baby boomer. That would refer to that generation as prehistoric. So that's how marketing would have defined Moses. Jesus referred to himself in his ministry as a prophet, priest, and king. Can you think of any other leaders of the Jews who could claim to be prophet, priests, and kings? Levi. All right. He wasn't the one I had in mind. Oh, Eli? Eli? Okay. I was thinking about King David. I don't know about Eli very well, but I know about David. He was not a son of Aaron, so he was not a priest in the order of the Levites. But he claimed to be a priest, and his priesthood came through the order of Melchizedek. He identified himself with the priest. He was clothed in a linen ephod, exactly as the Levites were when he came into practice, came in to be the king. If you look at him that day, he looked exactly like a Levite would have looked. And the ark came to his home city. There was no better place for something that you own, though he could not really own the ark. He shares a meal with the people of Israel, and only priests could eat the sacrifices, yet David ate of the bread, the meat, and the cakes of raisins. He sang the song of Moses and the Lamb, which is something that the priests did. He taught the law. He thought it as a priestly duty. God promised Jesse, one of his sons, that David would be a priest. And David explains how all of this is bringing into play a new priest after the order of Melchizedek, Jesus. He said, I'm a new priest. This is what God is going to do for us. He's going to bring a new priesthood in place, and he did. Yes, priests were the tribe of, yet being a priest was more about doing things, and David was doing priestly things. As a priest, he was saying, a new priest is on the way who will be of the tribe of Judah. Now that would be very unusual, to be of the tribe of Judah and not of the priestly tribe. Moses also claimed to be a priestly king. Moses ruled not only the nation of Israel, but also what he called the congregation or the church of Israel. Now, it's unimaginable to think that God's great leader of the Israelites all the way through his entire life, who did so many wonderful things for them. He parted the Red Sea. He led the group to Canaan. He administered justice all along the way. He provided food, water, and security. How could he spend the latter part of his life leading them, but then not being able to go with them into that promised land? It just doesn't seem fitting to me. It's a wrong ending for the story, isn't it? It just seems wrong. But that's what happened. That's what we read in the Bible. But Moses gives us the reason. It was by no fault of his own, but by the fault of the people. Clearly, it made him angry to speak of it. If it had not been for their unfaithfulness through 40 years of wandering, he would have been able to sit on the throne of Israel as their first king. Now, this mountain is not Pisgah Mountain in Asheville, North Carolina, just so you get that in your mind. And it is the mountain that we know as Pisgah. This mountain lies in the land of Canaan. The Bible says he went up to the top of this mountain 8 times in a row in a process of receiving those commandments. Today, given the roads that lead up, it takes about 4.5 hours to walk to the top. You can imagine it took him a lot longer because that nice road, that curvy road that leads all over to the top was not there at the time of Moses. He had to traverse it on a more of a vertical plane as he walked up to the top. There are several verses in Exodus that refer to this. If you would like to read them, I've got them for you, but I won't tell you which ones they are right now. The tall things that you see that are circled in red there at the very top of this mountain are not cactuses, they are not all that is up there on top of this thing. So it looks kind of bald, doesn't it? Like there's not much up there. That's not the case. They are communication towers, and it helps get radio and other kinds of communication going from up there on high. This is what the top actually looks like. We were looking at it looking up. What's up there on top of it is this. It's a home to a monastery and offices for what's called the Custodia Terra Sancta, the custodians of the sanctified land, an organization that's founded by the Franciscan order of the Catholic Church, and they oversee the management and maintenance of many of the holy sites in all of Israel. This mountaintop would be a very important one, at least to the Catholics anyway, and the holy places that are over there. Numbers is Moses' travel log, right? I mean, when you go on somewhere, you might take a diary with you and write down the places you were at, what time you were there, how you got there, those kinds of things. That's what Moses was doing in his writing. It was his diary of everything that went on to get them from one place to the other. He urges them in his writings to remember, to be faithful, and to take comfort in our God. I know a church here in town I used to go to that is named has the word comfort in its name. Israel is a covenant relationship with God. Do you have any covenants today? I kind of wish we did, because it's an interesting way of doing things. It's a promise that two people made, both of them together, to do a joint venture, and who work together then to accomplish a common goal. The inner core of the covenant in Deuteronomy is Deuteronomy chapters 12 through 26, and it's the bond that God has with his people, the Israelites. You only covenant with people you trust. Most of the book of Exodus defines the inner core of the covenant as the law. It's the terms on which trust people have in God and God's trust in the people. So the middle ring there expands on this to define how they were to keep the terms of the covenant. That's the very core of this covenant, are the terms that say, you will keep this covenant when you do these things. And the outside ring is more celebratory than the rest. It expresses the enjoyment of the people for keeping that law and the promises it provides information of how to manage these terms. So when you look at these verses in Deuteronomy, chapters 1 through 3, 31 through 34, you can understand how we're talking about Joshua being appointed. The law is first talked about there. Moses sings a song, and ultimately then Moses' death. Then in chapters 4 and chapters 27, near the end of it, 27 through 30, it's all about how the Israelites were to keep that law. And then in the center of all of that is a little section that deals with how they should worship their God. Altogether, it's put together very well, I think. But we really don't understand covenant today. And we'll have an opportunity to talk more about it later. Have you memorized by heart chapters 32 through 34 of the book of Deuteronomy? I haven't. But you better remember it by heart before you die, and here's why. Understanding God's covenant requires a few chapters in the book of Deuteronomy. Chapters 1 through 4 explain the encouragement the people are going to enjoy. The next three chapters, 5 through 11, talks about the principles on which the covenant is founded. So we're getting ready now to begin to talk about the covenant, and the rest of the book is all about that. Chapters 12 through 26 give the rulers some guidelines. If you're a ruler under a covenant relationship, here are some things you need to do. Chapters 27 through 30 provide blessings and warnings. Do this and be blessed. Do this and you'll be cursed. And then finally, it ends chapters 31 through 34. Moses gives some final charges. These are more personal in nature. It's not so right and wrong oriented. It's more personal. The book ends in chapters 32 through 34 with the final song, which we better get to know, because we will be singing that song when we get to heaven. We need to know it by heart, folks. Its song gives Moses his final blessings and a bit about his final actions before he died. If you want to know the words to that song, go to the book and read these chapters. Did Moses set foot in Israel? No, he never made it to Israel. He was allowed only to see the promised land from a distance, right? He never got to set foot in it. That is such a, if you made this into a movie, people would say, what a horrible ending, right? He worked so hard to get there. He got there. He was just a step away, and he didn't make it to the end. Well, that's the book that we read when we read about what Moses did. This is a list of all the things Moses did. Ordained the new leader, Joshua, gave the final laws to Israel, destroyed a whole group of people, the Midianites. He didn't really destroy all of them, though, because Saul is going to have to deal with the Midianites much later. Allowed some Jews to live east of the Jordan. He reminds everybody of his life and journeys. At the very end, he prepared then to enter his own version of Canaan, but it wasn't the Canaan that he thought he was going to. And then finally, toward the very end of his life, he wrote the book of Deuteronomy so that we could know about all the things that went on. This is his speech at the end of the wilderness, east of the Jordan, in the upper part of Moab. So in other words, they're there. They can see over the river and know what it's going to be when they get there. They can't wait, and Moses is holding them back. And he gives them the passage. Otherwise, they could have made the journey. Oh, wait a minute. He lambasts in this Edom. He says Edom is horrible. They're the worst people on the earth. God should get rid of all of them, because if they had just allowed us to go through their land, Moab, we could have gotten to Israel in 11 days. Instead, it took them years to get there. And in this book, he expounds for the second time, and that's why it's called Deuteronomy. Deuteros means second. And for the second time, he gives the law. Moses was saying in Deuteronomy, let's take a quick look back and remember the actions all the way from the beginning. He reminds them of a lot of things that happened. He reminds them of the promise that none who started on this journey would actually see the land, and that's very true. But there were some exceptions to that. Joshua and Caleb would be able to see the land and go into the land. But everybody else, because of their unfaithfulness, would never get to enter this land that he brought them to. He reminds them of their 40-year journey, and he tells them that because of his own hardness of heart, God would not allow him to see the promised land. So he starts with the summary. The summary of Deuteronomy starts, for a long time we made our way around the hill country until God told us to go north. The mountains and the Jordan River separated us from Palestine this whole time. They had to contest with neighbors to the east, such as Edom and Moab and Arad. 38 years later, they finally made it to Palestine. Can you imagine it just taking so long? 38 years to get from Egypt to Canaan. Did you know today the trip to get from Egypt to Canaan takes less than 9 hours if you drive at 50 kilometers an hour? That would be 31 miles an hour in our parlance. 9 hours took them 38 years. Can you tell me how far their journey was in miles compared to the state of Arkansas? Was it longer than from Fort Smith all the way over to Memphis, Tennessee? Was it longer than that? Was it way longer than that? How about was it shorter than that? What do you think? The distance of the state of Arkansas. Arkansas is 270 miles from one side to the other at the widest part, which is up here at the north. 270 miles from one side to the other. And that's exactly the distance of getting from Egypt to Israel, 270 miles. Now, we get in a car at 65 miles an hour, it only takes us 4 hours. 4 hours at 65. It took them 40 years to get there. That's just amazing to me. As we've discussed, the Moabites let them come to their territory, but they were detestable and tried to get them to sin and fornication, and eventually they came up to the Amorites' territory, and there the battles began. Did all of the Jews at the time of Moses take the full trip, or did any stop short and establish a land that today is not considered Canaan on the east side of the Jordan? Are there Jews over there? Yes, there are. And it's because of what Moses did. He allowed some of them to stay over there on the east side and not come all with him. The interesting fact is that 3 families wanted the land to the east of Jordan, and they were given the Amorite land to establish, but they had to promise that they would come to their brothers and fight wars with them later. They erected an altar on the top of a mountain that you can see even today, and it looks down over Palestine. Moses tells Joshua that he would take the lead from here. Then he regretted, but he did, tell the Israelites that they were complicit in God's anger with them. Because of their unfaithfulness, Moses had to plead with God a few times not to kill them and to forgive them. God then tells Moses that he had struggled long enough. Moses climbed to the top of Mount Nebo. Chapter 4 of Deuteronomy is a promise that will happen only if you obey God. You have the responsibility to teach all of this to your children, Moses told them. Your children should know all your God has done for you. He spoke to you at Sinai. He gave you the 10 Commandments. He told you not to engage in idolatry and love your God. Every single one of those things, folks, were at one point in time or another disobeyed by the Israelites. Some of the 10 Commandments are positive, right? And some are negative. There's a whole lot of thou shalt nots and a handful of thou shalts, or you should. What's more restrictive? A positive or a negative commandment? When your children come to you and say, you're forcing me not to do something I want to do, and I can't stand it. You do that all the time, Dad. What's more restrictive? When you tell them they can do something or tell them they can't do something? What do you think? About the same? to not do something is more restrictive? We'll talk about that in just a minute. Hang on to that thought. A negative command is less restrictive. A negative command says you can only do one thing in this relationship you have. You can only do one thing. But a positive command, you can't do this one thing, but a positive command allows you a whole lot of different ways to do one thing. So in a sense, people fuss about all of these do nots, but really God is being more, He's allowing more for them by giving them negative commands than giving them only positive commands there. The divine charge to Moses and Joshua is this. Joshua was called in to receive his commission from Moses. He took over. He took over from Moses. What did God expect the Israelites to do? Well, his expectations were given along with the punishments if they didn't follow his law. God expected them to do all that he had commanded them. And they, of course, would react negatively when they were punished, just like our kids did. And they would make a song about it even. And if you make a song out of anything, it helps your kids remember stuff. You want to help them remember to get up and brush their teeth in the morning, make a song out of it. And sing that song to them when they're little, not when they're 13 or 14. That doesn't work. Don't try that. But when they're young, you can sing a song with them, and that kind of helps reinforce the idea and get the song in their head. Hopefully they'll brush their teeth more often, but I don't know. But that's what Moses thought. He thought, how can I get the people to do what I want them to do? I know. I'll make a song out of it. That way they'll remember the verses, they'll remember everything they should do. And so that's why we have what we call the Song of Moses, the Song of Moses and the Lamb. I think I'll end there. It's just a minute or two early. Let you talk amongst yourself and have fun. And then we'll end our services here in just a few minutes. And I'll pick up right there with this lesson next week, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.